we have three amazing speakers joining us today. So alongside interesting theoretical perspectives on this topic, we hope there are going to be some practical ideas for people to try out in their classes.
And for our three speakers today, we have Dr. Boaz Chow, lecturer from the School of Chinese Opera from our academy, the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts. And we also have Dr. Phoebe Chan, head of Performing Arts Research and Postgraduate Studies Coordinator in the academy. And we also have one external speaker, Dr. Curtis Bonk, professor in the School of Education, Indiana University in the United States. In terms of the structure of this webinar, first of all, I think the three speakers will talk about the question of online student engagement. And following the discussion, we'll be taking questions from the audience. And there are also questions that are sent to us earlier that we'll be bringing those questions to our speakers. Throughout the presentations, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the chat box. We'll be monitoring and bringing those questions to our speakers. So without further delay, I'm just going to pass the mic to Boaz, Dr. Boaz Chow. Would you like to begin?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Boaz from the School of Chinese Opera of HKAPA, and I teach mostly the music theory courses and also some history and contextual courses. And I think engaging students in online environments is extremely important for me, not only for the benefit of students, but also for my own comfort and security. I remember the first time I used Zoom to have lecture online. I keep asking my students, is everyone hearing me? Am I showing the right screen? And am I playing the right clips? Because if they are not engaged in the lessons, I feel that I'm speaking to the virus. So I think I have tried my best to engage all the students to keep them active online. So after that lessons, I have changed my teaching method by dividing my own topics into many small assignments so that they can, the students can complete the assignment to learn the topics. So I think nowadays the teachers teaching online is acting as a facilitators. By, for example, I will initiate some discussions and also start a discussion forums for the students. And I pose questions and ask them to complete step-by-steps. And also I will be a sharer of some informations, not delivering the knowledge, but share information for them to complete those tasks and assignments. And also I will provide some timely assistance for the students. You know, online teaching is 40 hours a day. Students can come around their questions even in the midnight. So I will try to answer their questions on time so they can complete their works on their own pace. And also I think through this teaching method is echo with the ideas of the outcome-based learning. That means that the students know the outcomes of the course, and then by completing the assignments, they can approach the goal more easily. So, so of course, this is not a, for me, it's still learning how to make it more smooth or make it more efficient. So, but for example, I have to mark over 300 assignments in the past semester for the online courses. It is different from face-to-face teaching. That face-to-face teachings you can directly discuss with the students to solve their questions in time. But when doing online teaching, when you engage students to work together, you have to work with their own pace. So it may spend more time to discuss with the students. But I think the students is happy with this kind of teaching because they feel they are being cared for individually. So I think my students are quite enjoy this kind of teaching approach. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Boaz. I'd now like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Phoebe Chan, who's Head of Performing Arts Research and Postgraduate Studies Coordinator in the Academy. So Phoebe, I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your approach and how you're thinking about engagement.
Yes, thank you, Robert. At the Academy, at the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts, the subjects that I teach are mostly related to research because that is what my unit is doing for. So for postgraduate students, I teach them research methods, in particular practice as research methods. For undergraduate students, I conduct a course for them on reflective practice. So the kinds of courses that are usually put under the category of contextual studies within the Academy, which for some students, it might be regarded as those dry and theoretical, if not boring, aspects of performing arts studies. So all along, even before I taught online, all along I had been very concerned about employing active learning strategies in the classroom to, first of all, to engage the students so that they feel and they find that, you know, research is actually very much connected to them, to their practice as performing artists. And with that kind of active learning approach, I mean, I would employ a lot of learning activities within the classroom, and a lot of aesthetic experiences are built into that process, because it is my belief that it's not just for performing artists, but for everyone. The aesthetic experiences actually help us learn better, help us connect to the content of the course much better, and to make sense of that experience much better. Now, last semester, I had to move the course I taught on research methods entirely online. And soon I found that, amongst many things, I think the online teaching had a lot of benefits to you, but amongst all those benefits, I also found that moving online flattened the experience of the students and me. And when I use the word flattened, I mean, I mean, there are a number of things that I observed. First of all, some senses are lost or not used as fully as when I was teaching face-to-face, namely touch, sense of space, and also that kind of very subtle ambience and atmosphere when you actually interact with people in the same space, in the same room, very like subtle eye contacts, and even feeling the person sitting next to you, that kind of subtle feelings, they are lost. But of course, the online platform also have other elements that are stronger, like visual and audio, and even using like multimedia, etc. So I was in that situation when I found, oh, the situation is changing. That's something that I need to look into. So it's flattened in that sense. It is also, online teaching also flattened teaching and learning in the other senses. A lot of our learning activities is now framed within this square of our upper body. So there's a lot of talking, a lot of things happening in our heads. In a way, it privileges more the cognitive presence. No, it doesn't have to be, but that's the impression people would get. And for example, when I was in one workshop, when I was actually asking the students I gave them a task of creating an artwork and presenting it at Zoom. Very quickly, they were talking about the artwork rather than presenting the artwork. So I became aware that, the students, being new to online learning as well, they are not very used to turning this space, this Zoom space, into a more aesthetic space. So that was another question, another issue that I was trying to tackle. So, and then I began to think about, how I can actually thicken the learning experience more on an online platform by looking at, how the different strategies that I might use to bring in more aesthetic engagement. And by that, I mean aesthetic engagement, I mean how to make the online classroom more fully alive, more multisensory, employing more symbols and metaphors, more feelings and affections, embodied experiences, and artistic experiences. So I've been doing some experiments, you may say, in the last semester, and also during the semester break, I've also been thinking more thoroughly about how I will be teaching this course in the next semester. So I think I will be sharing those experiences and thoughts with you later on in the later part of this webinar.
Thank you, Phoebe. And now we're moving on to our third speaker, Dr. Curtis Bonk. Curtis?
Well, hello, and this is maybe unfair for me to present because I've been dealing in this space for 3 decades or more, and have a couple of books, one of which is free. I'll share with you in a minute, so you can all come away with from this with a free book that's in Chinese and in English. So, but I've been researching as well as experimenting in pedagogy, in online and blended learning. I have a handbook of blended learning if you want to get into that blended or hybrid. If you don't, we'll just toss that book for now. And most recently in the area of Moocs and open education, looking at that. And so when we talk about Moocs and open education, we have to think about, people don't complete them because their Moocs are library books, just like people don't read a full book. Some people are in it to get the course, but majority of people are in it to dabble and to learn from a section or two. So I've been researching self-directed learning in Moocs most recently. And I'm about, after the session, to write a paper about how to design Moocs and online learning to help learners be more self-directed. How do we foster that? And so, and by the way, I'm a former accountant or CPA, as you can tell from my pink suit and hat. I'm a boring kind of guy. And so, no, really, accounting was boring. And because of that, I've devoted the rest of my life to making learning be more active and engaging for others because it was so awful. So when we say that online is not as interactive and engaging and collaborative as face-to-face, believe me, face-to-face can be plenty boring. If you take a sufficient number of accounting classes, you'll find out. People ask me where I get my energy from. I say, try and be an accountant for a week or a day, and every other day will be a better day. So I'm happy to be with you again. I was there and visiting it face-to-face in person at Hong Kong Academy for the Performing Arts 5 years ago in June 2015. And for anyone who came to my talks back then, thank you for coming back and being repeat offenders and coming again to another one of my sessions. I enjoyed my time there, and I hope I can see you all face to face again. I'm going to try something here. I'm going to share my screen to show you the 2 models that I've designed and to talk a little bit about what you can do with those models. So let's see if I can call those up. And sometimes if you, there we go. I think I got it. Okay, there I go. So one thing that's kind of interesting right now in terms of performing arts, at the beginning of all my sessions now, I'm calling up these virtual choirs. So you can in fact have wondrous things that are done in an online environment, like a virtual choir, that can't take place in a face-to-face as readily or as easily. These are when people are performing around the world, singing and dancing and whatever else. So anyways, as an aside, this is an example of things that can happen in virtual spaces that are enhanced. Now, one of my models is called the Tech Variety model. It stands for 10 principles of motivation: tone, encouragement, curiosity, variety, autonomy, and so forth. And they get at challenging students and giving feedback and making it more personal, goal setting, and peer interaction, and so forth. I have a second model, that's my R2D2 model, my Star Wars model. I can get my lightsaber out. And that's something that it's called read, reflect, display, and do. And so that's the follow-up to the first 100 activities book. This one is free. This one is not. But anyways, I have 2 models, and we're basically subdividing the web into 4 things you can do: reading, reflecting, displaying, and doing. With the Tech Variety model, we have 10 things that you can do for motivating learners. And some of them are high risk, some are low risk, some are high time, some are low time, some are high cost, some are low cost. And those are the 10 principles that spell Tech Variety, from tone, encouragement, curiosity, variety, and so forth, all the way to yielding products. in the free book that you can download, and I'll put in the chat window the download link. It's at techvariety.com, tec-variety.com, or TECH. You can misspell it, it will still work. So in there we have 10 activities for each principle, or 100 total. And we have variations on each one. So we really have 200 ideas in there. And we get at, I'm going to skip over a couple of these. So I wasn't planning to show all these, but I'm quickly moving through here. So we get at tone. How do you create a safe tone or climate? Some people use Flipgrid to do introductions, student introductions, and so forth. Some use Slido. Just let student voice rate the ideas and rate questions. But we'd use different tools out there to get at tone and climate, to get at feedback, polling tools, poll everywhere, and certain tools out there like that. And so I'm going to stop here, but there are different tools that you can use to give students feedback on their papers, like Vocaro, instead of handwriting them. Having a quiz to get students feedback on their performance, those kinds of things, tutorials. So we talk about all these things, how to use the news, current events. So I'll stop my sharing right now. Those are just a couple examples of ideas that constantly change. So the two frameworks, the tech variety is a motivational framework. R2D2 is a framework to think about problem solving. Some people look at it as learning styles, but think about addressing diverse learners. Those are two frameworks or models that will exist no matter what the technologies are. They always come and go. So we're constantly being inundated with new technologies that our deans or our colleagues are saying, use this, use this, use. I got frustrated, so frustrated. I said, let's create frameworks or models that can lower the tension, that can lower the stress of everybody. And if you go from that model, how do we build feedback? How do we build interaction, collaboration? It's not about the technology. It's about finding principles to create an environment, safe, comfortable, and engaging, and pushing them a little bit, nudging, an environment that encourages their academic growth. And so that's my goal, is how do we create a learning environment? Either face-to-face, blended, or fully online. I'll stop there, Robert. And I know you got a lot of questions for us.
Yeah, so if anyone would like to post questions, feel free at this point. So we're using the chat. So feel free, if you have a question, just to pop it in the chat. We have some already which people posted when they registered. So I think the point which Curtis raised around pedagogy is really key here, because I think something that keeps on emerging is it's not about the technology, it's about how you use that technology and the pedagogies we're using. So I wonder if it's useful just to start off by defining what is different about performing arts pedagogy, because I think there is a difference, and I think, Phoebe, you picked up on this as well, that it is different in the performing arts perhaps to somebody who's teaching history or another type of subject. So what are those differences perhaps? Are there any differences in our learners as well? Because I think there might well be some differences between typical learners in higher education and students who choose to come and do performing arts. And then perhaps thinking about how that changes how we act as teachers, whether that's face-to-face or in an online environment. So I don't know, perhaps to begin with, either Boaz or Phoebe, if you'd like to come in on that, because you've obviously got that experience.
Yeah, well, for me, I think performing arts students is not one type of student. There are a lot of a diversity amongst the students as well, and particularly at the academy we have 6 schools. The students coming from different disciplines. Say if you're a sound designer, you might think and learn very differently from an opera singer and from a dancer. So I don't want to say that there are like some unique or exclusive characteristics about performing arts students, but I tend to think that in general, I think like all students, whether you are doing performing arts or not, students are engaged when they find their learning experiences meaningful, and then that is the task of us to know how to turn the experience meaningful to them. They are engaged when they are given suitable challenges. No one would like to be like being lectured information that they can easily Google online. So know how to make the learning process meaningful and challenging for them is something that I've been practicing all along, either it's in face-to-face teaching or online teaching. Well, there are something that I found it easier to work with when I'm working with performing arts students, because they're all art lovers. So in a way, it is easier to ask them to try something artistic. And also it is easier to ask them to try new things or think out of the box in a way. I've taught many different people, not just performing arts students, but some groups that I teach will be less ready to relate to the arts pedagogy when they're asked to, can you try to stand up, like say in an English literature class, can you try to stand up and do something, and then, or I don't really feel comfortable about that. But for performing arts students, it's a lot easier to do that. So that is something that makes my life a bit easier too, because I don't need to do so much groundwork to get them prepared for those moments of active learning or participating in active learning or activities. So those are some of my observations.
Great. Boaz, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I agree with Phoebe's that our students are more easier for them to be engaged, in some movement. But I think in my perspective that Chinese opera, there are two key elements I still think it is not quite possible to be taught through online environments. One of them are the oral tradition approach. Oral tradition doesn't mean that you just tell how to do, and you have to show them how to do, and then you have to lead and guide them to guide the student to work together. So in the old days, when we are working on the oral tradition, we have to play together on stage, and even in the classroom, there is some rehearsal and then practice. But for online elements, it is not easier. It's not easy to do so. And I think for oral tradition is work for the Chinese opera, because Chinese opera incorporates many types of elements in the one performance, say singing, acting, drama, and also reciting in the same piece of work. So when you separate this one by one to teach, then it spends a lot of time. But when you do it through an oral tradition, you can sense, just like Phoebe's introduction said, you can sense it, you can feel it, and also you can inspired by the performance around you. So I think it is quite challenging for us to teach using the oral tradition approach still in online environment. And the second thing is the improvisations. Still in Chinese opera, there's a lot of elements of improvisations. There's many interactions between actors, between actor and musicians, and also the performers and the audience. So when it is all things is put online, as Phoebe said, it's flattened. No such interactions or improvisation can be done. So I think we have to seek some advice or some solutions from those jazz schools to see how they teach improvisation online, so we can have some inspiration of the teacher method. Yeah.
And is there anything that you've done differently in the last few months as you've been exploring this further to actually start to engage the students in those sorts of tasks, in those improvisations, in using those barriers and learning orally, all of those types of things?
I think because we are still exploring different methods in teaching. So I think in the past month, we have to some kind of remote controlling the students to learn, to ask them to learn by themselves. But for example, we share informations, we share some videos and audios, so they can learn, and then make some recordings to back to us as teachers, so we can know how they learn from those materials. And also we have some deep discussion with the students so that we know the ongoing progress. So I think we work together and we walk together with the students to make things done. So it's still exploring some new method here. Yeah.
Yeah. And Curtis, I know you haven't got a performing arts background, although obviously you're quite a colourful character, as it were. And I like this idea of walking together with students. I know it picks up on some themes that you write about in terms of how to actually engage and work with students. So I wonder if there's anything there which you might want to pick up on.
Learning in progress. You need your yellow police tape wrapped around you when you are learning synchronously at home so your parents don't interrupt you. Anyways, I'll disagree slightly, and we're constantly going to come with some new technologies that enable us to do things we said could never be done. People didn't think, playing musical instruments together from London to, Toronto would be possible, but it is. Recently, I read an article from Imperial College London that gets at holographic conferences. So you think that what will happen in the future if people can do and they can, by the way, send holographic images from Toronto to the First Nation people in the northern parts of Ontario for trainings. And that's happening where they don't have roads that go there, but they have these holographic images being sent, So the impossible becomes possible. So, we have to be aware of that. It's, right now, on the other hand, when we talk about what is possible for everyone, we have to think about both if you're performing as well as watching a performance. What online learning does, it has a stockpile of videos and animations and simulations and you name it that are available for instructors to utilize to tap into what El Bandura calls vicarious learning. So I'm trained as an educational psychologist. So social cognitive theory gets at, the reason we do teach teenagers how to drive a car through a simulation is because we don't want them running over people the first time. We want, and the same, have a virtual chemistry lab before going in and blowing things up. Well, in performing arts areas, and for my area in teacher training, we have virtual labs settings, we have simulated lab settings, or we have a set of videos with expert teachers reflecting on them. And today you can have, I've had a couple students do dissertations on this, watching videos and annotating them. You can annotate video. You can segment videos with Tube Chop, a little tool that you can into small segments and look for particular things that are in that video segment. So if you're teaching performance, having your students, in fact, find the videos that best exemplify that performance that you want. And I have my students be the cool resource provider that once a semester, they have to be the cool resource provider that finds something that I don't have. It's not in my syllabus, it's not in the class lesson plan or content, and they're finding something that helps the class. And in the meantime, they're becoming the instructor, they're teaching others, and I add to my resource pool. So one thing to think about is how to utilize this shared online video to create a macro context for discussions. And I've written a paper on that. It's free. I can send that to you, Robert, and you can share it with everybody. But that's something where you want to build again the environment that's replayable with video. You can come back to it and say, did you catch that the first time? So that's on the observer watching standpoint. On the active and engaging, my students do podcast shows. My students use Animaker to animate sequences. We're creating documentaries. So there are tools. Canva is a tool to create brochures or whatever. So you have certain tools like Animaker and Canva and others that lets them be empowered to do something, to create a performance. Your students can, I have my students do a YouTube video to finalize the class. What do they learn in the class, right? So it can be passively, not quite really passive if they're annotating the videos, but less active in watching something that you found, and then more active in creating. You do a combination of creating and observing, and you're gonna have a really powerful classroom, and it can be an online class. It doesn't have to be a face-to-face for all that empowerment of learning to happen.
Thank you, Curtis. I want to kind of bring two questions from the chat box to the speakers, and I think that some of them are kind of on the practical side of things, and then so Curtis, you already kind of give up some examples. This is really good. So one of the questions, this is a question from Beijing. So I think we're broadcasting our webinar on Shetang X. So the question here from the audience is how to lead productive and efficient online lessons in a performing arts context. And this question actually is very close to another one that is sent to us in Chinese, but I think Phoebe, you have kindly translated it to English. And the question is, I'll just read it out. In online teaching for performing arts, the biggest challenge we face is the passing on of skills. Do you have any sharing or tips in this area? For example, in dance and drama, without the space of moving, students can only sit in front of the screen to learn. Do you think that in the long run, online teaching can replace face-to-face teaching and learning? Why?
I don't believe online teaching can entirely replace face-to-face learning. Well, at least not when the technology is so advanced that, like hologram or the AR is common enough for people to adopt in everyday teaching and learning. So that's my stand anyway. Well, regarding the question about how to conduct online learning more effectively, I think that is something that I'm still learning. But recently, in that personal learning journey, I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between online and offline learning, or online learning tasks and offline learning experiences. Say, for example, in a class about in reflective practice, in which we are going to ask our students to do journaling, in a more effective way. My colleague and I, because we're team teaching the course, my colleague and I were thinking about creating a task for the students so they have an artistic experience to write a journal about. And then in thinking about that experience, we gave the students the task, an offline task indeed. We asked them to choose an object and find a space and create a piece of art on the theme of isolation. So that is what we gave them, the task we gave them, and they're going to do it in their own time. They're going to write a journal and then post it on Canvas, the learning site for arts to comment on. So in designing that task, that idea about the flattened space actually came in when we were designing that task, because as I said, I found that the Zoom setting actually crushed the space that we can explore. So in particular, we gave students this a topic about the space in creating that artwork, because even people are living in small spaces, if you can walk away from your computer and work in this small space next to your desk, that's still something that opens us up to, reopens our senses to the space and how we relate to the space. And we didn't say whether you can do that task with a person or not. It doesn't have to be a solo piece. If someone would like to grab her little brother and do a piece of artwork with her, that is something that would be interesting too, because it is no longer you facing the computer and doing teaching and learning only in that limited space. So these are the things that I've been trying and thinking about in developing my teaching practice.
I'll add in there, you can have the expert come in. Every week in some of my classes, I have experts around the world coming in. So if you want to get students immersed in the skill base and the competencies that they need, bring the experts in. So they might watch a video of the expert in film or in some other performance area, and then have that expert explain her film that won an award and what was key about it, and let students ask him or her questions about that. I mean, there have been virtual field trips for decades that we've had here and people have around the world to get students to understand history better. Take them to a virtual Civil War battlefield, So yes, coming in from other spaces around the world can, again, this is a add-on. This is something more powerful than that face-to-face class was doing in the past. Now, face-to-face, you can do that too, bringing in guests now live. So I have people whose articles we're reading, whose books we've read, whose video we watched every week, and students might nominate a person and actually send an email to that person, and I give them bonus points for doing so. You know, so they're empowered and they are and they are engaged in the class because they brought in the person or they recommended the person. So that's a couple of things that you can do, and you can also engage them in the competencies through tutorials that you do in Jing or in some other system that screencasting systems, showing them the screen, the performance, and then talking them through it and what you're expecting them to do. So they're watching the video that is explaining it. And then you might immerse them further in having role play wrapped around that, having interactive role play. And I've been doing role play for decades on that, where I have people take personality roles, optimist, pessimist, bloodletter, whatever, question asker, and so forth. Or you can take people roles, have them take, and they have to then read about that person in order to act as that person. So those are a couple of things that might enliven the class. And I'll mention a tool that you might consider using called Flipgrid that was built by a colleague of mine at the University of Minnesota, where they talk funny up there in Minnesota. He built it and then he sold it to Microsoft. And now he quit his job as a faculty and works for Microsoft full time. His name is Charlie Miller. But anyway, Flipgrid is free from Microsoft as part of their suite. And it's a tool for video threaded discussions. So a short video like this, and they have threaded discussions. That gets students to talk about the competencies and the skills and the things they see, and it's more engaging. I mean, millions of teachers are using it around the world today. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of Flipgrid, I guess the security settings is also kind of better too, because it's built by Microsoft and it can be integrated with Outlook, the email Office 360 that we're using in the academy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Curtis, and thank you, Phoebe. And I think Boaz, you have something you want to add?
I think Boaz might have frozen from the look of things.
Echoes with one of the hot questions in nowadays, that when nowadays the COVID-19, all the theater have been closed. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, Boaz, there's a little bit of a delay in what you're saying.
Just as I said in the introduction, that is everyone hearing me?
We're hearing you, but there's a bit of a delay. So can you hear us well? I think you mentioned that offline, all the theater are closed, or?
Okay, here. I see. So is it okay now? Not yet.
It's fine. We can hear you well.
Then I will just keep talking. Yeah, and so I have told my students before that in nowadays, online environment is another stage for them. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, online environment is another stage for the performers nowadays. So besides learning how to perform on stage in theater, they have to learn how to perform online. So I think we explored a new environment or a staging environment for the students. So even we talk about face-to-face, whether face-to-face will be replaced by online teaching. And we have to answer another question, that whether the online video environments will replace the real theater experience. And I think from now, two ways will be work together. So when we design our teaching when we design our learning outcome, we have to think about how to incorporate online performance into their learning experience, so they can work from in two environments comfortably. Yeah.
Boaz, thank you for that, because it's going to be the topic.
So I think both face and online teachings will be work together from now on.
Yeah, I think we're actually going to talk about this in our next webinar, how the arts themselves might be changed by what's been happening and how increasingly the arts might well be moving into that online space. So thank you for introducing that. I think it's a really key point. Just to move on, we have a question from one of our registrants asking about how they could go about marking students' works, written assignments and things online. So I guess there's that question about how do we make that process of assessment more engaging? Are there things we can do online that we can't do face-to-face? And perhaps most importantly, when we're assessing student work, how do we increase the impact of our assessment and make that engaging? So it's really powerful in terms of changing how students approach their work. Curtis, I don't know if you want to come in on that.
I can touch on that. It's not my favorite topic. I used to be an accountant, remember, and we assessed everybody, and I got into education to free people up to learn. So I actually think marking needs to be a word we put in the bin. Assessment to some degree as well, but assessment needs to be expanded because really quality instruction in this age, in the 21st century, is about instructor as curator, counselor, concierge, all these C words, conductor, orchestra conductor, community organizer. Assessment is part of that, but we're a coach. So I think the term assister of learning instead of assessor of learning. Assister of learning is someone who models what to do, explains, pushes students to explore, to clarify their thinking, does some direct instruction, maybe 15% instead of 80%, forms teams and so forth. So assessment is a key part of that, but assessment's broadened out to this learning environment issue. So it's iterative, it builds. It's not a one-off and in the bin. It's revised and improved. And it's done for something that's ultimately an authentic product that can be utilized for something else somewhere in the career. And so that assessment is not just marked up by instructors, it is looked at by their peers and evaluated in a gallery tour. So creating a gallery of students' work, and then the best practices percolate to the top for next semester. You bring back prior students into the class as evaluators, and they get it on their resumes to say, well, they helped Dr. Bonk's class as, blah, blah, blah. And so for everyone gets a role and benefits from the assessment. So assessment can come from the machine, from the computer. We know that in engineering and computer science. It can come from the instructor, of course, but it also can come from peers. It can come from the student themselves in self-reflection, right? And it can come from prior students and experts out there who look at the gallery. You can have competitions and they can award points or be the judges of that. So I think assessment has to be a broader understanding instead of us just focusing on delivery and then we assess whether they've learned it or not. To create a community around the contents is much more than that. We have to celebrate their learning within a community of hopefully practitioners, right?
I think that's a really key point. I guess in the past, we've had this idea of one person to many, and what you're talking about is this many to many, this network.
Multi-pronged assessment, and you can have rubrics for that. You can. So my dissertation was on computers and writing, and I read the writing research. Took a long time, a lot of books. There's a lot of notion about dimensional assessments. What are you looking for in their performance? Persuasiveness, coherence, all critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, and then you create the rubrics, you explain it to them, you make it transparent so they're understanding what they're assessed on, rather than just this. Oh, that's a 90 and that's an 80. No, get really specific so they can improve on their performance in the next round.
Brilliant.
I am more focusing on formative assessment than summative assessment. So for summative assessment, I think I've been pretty much doing the same. The students do their presentations, submit their papers, particularly given the courses that I'm teaching. But I do have some thoughts about how to make the formative assessment more engaging. For example, in one of the tasks in which the students are doing a presentation of a research proposal that they are going to submit in writing. So that is formative, so they're not assessed for the presentation, but that is a step to help them write the proposal in a better way. So the way I structured the class was one student will be presenting, and then two other students will become the presenter's critical friends. Let's say I am presenting my proposal and Louise and Robert become my critical friends. So they've been given this responsibility to respond and to give feedback that will help me develop my proposal. And of course, the course instructor is there as well. So the presenter is actually getting feedback from 3 different people at least. So when I was teaching face-to-face, that also occurred in a large class. So everybody was sitting there as audience, but 2 students will be given this specific role as a critical friend. Now that I'm doing it online, because it's very tiring for students to be sitting in front of the camera listening to so many presentations, I'm actually only asking the critical friends to come in, and I will be there for the presenter, but other students can join in like a webinar type of setting. If they would like to join, they can join, but if they don't want to join live, they will be watching the video recording of that presentation, and they're asked to write like a sentence or 2 in response to that recording, saying that what is the takeaway they got from the presenters or ideas. So in a way, that is the way that I try to make it more engaging by assigning people specific roles and responsibilities, and also making it flexible in whether they would like to watch it online or they come in live and ask a question in a webinar kind of setting.
That's an important point, the critical friend notion, because that extends the resources of this class. Peers are free. Critical friends are free. It doesn't cost you any money, and you can't give feedback to students on everything they do. So assigning in an online class a critical friend to give the first round of feedback. When my students blog, I have critical friends give them feedback on their blog posts, the reflections, and I grade the super summaries of them. So I'm not if I was to give feedback on everything they wrote, I would die. So you find ways to build feedback in the system. And there's research out there that shows peer feedback is deemed to be as good as instructor feedback when they compare it to machine, which the students didn't like. They much prefer a human, but the human can be a student or the instructor or an outside expert. So yeah, I like that idea of critical friend.
I think these are really powerful ideas, because it's moving away from the idea as the only authoritative person in the room is the teacher. And it's developing those reflective metacognitive competencies in all of the students. I think it's really powerful approaches.
But you have to be clear on what the critical friend is doing in your syllabus or plan, so you lay it all out and all that.
Yeah. Boaz, I don't know if you have anything to add to this in terms of assessment, how you're viewing assessment in what is essentially a practical subject a lot of the time.
I think for assessment, I agree with other speakers that the response and the feedback is very important. Just as in my introduction, that we try to engage students because we have to keep the ball rolling and keep all them online. So if the student doesn't give enough in response, we don't know they are still in the class. So I think we have to provide enough environments for them to have or some effective and efficient way for them to give response. So I think the learning website is important, and sometimes we will incorporate some personal communications software, but for those say online video response, that means they can write some comments on the video, and this kind of response is very important too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to bring in one more question, I think from the chat box earlier. Maybe I think the person just sent it to the panelists, so the other people can't really see it. But the question is a very simple question, basically, is as a dancer or a performer, how can we boost our confidence during online learning? And I think, again, online learning right now is kind of synonymous with, teaching on a screen. Even though, Phoebe, you talked about a lot of, strategies in terms of creating, space, basically moving from synchronous to asynchronous learning. And Boaz, you also talked about a lot about, dividing tasks into smaller chunks rather than trying to deliver everything through Zoom. But if we have to deliver, on a screen, how can we build their confidence? It's a tough question for you.
I started answering the question on the side there, and if you have small snippets that get some comments that start with the pros and what they found valuable in them before you get at the negatives. I taught with someone, team taught with someone once who only started with the negatives and then just continued with the negatives. It was a real demoralizing experience for our students because they never got a positive comment out of them at all. But we know in psychology, you start with some positive reinforcement, that goes a long ways. You don't only have positive reinforcement, you start with that, and then you point to some of the issues, some of the challenges, some of the things they weren't focused on. But if all you do is constantly perpetuate the negatives in there, then they'll run into a cycle of learned helplessness, and you can bring experts to give those comments as well. You might have to train the experts. They can come in anywhere in the world, so it's real important that you as a team think about how you're going to provide feedback, because if you're recruiting those experts and guides or former students, they have to have some kind of training too on the feedback, or you're going to have a mixed signal to the students.
I think that is a great question, and a question that is very difficult to answer too. That is why my first response was like, wow. Because I think confidence has a lot to do with a lot of things. And I think at this moment of time, the humankind is facing like an ever biggest challenge in our lives, not just performing artists, but we are facing a living environment that we are not familiar with. So that counts into how confident you can be as a performing artist too, and people might be doubting about what the future of performing arts is going to be like. And some people even I think a lot of artists around the world, they are facing financial difficulties as well. So how to make one confident in this kind of environment is a big issue, is a big topic indeed. But of course, in our online teaching, we are only dealing with that big question with dealing with a very small bit of that situation. But I do think that sharing of personal experiences is important. So in one of my classes, in the research class, I was taking through the students through what I call a mini-scale practice as research project. So they've got an idea of what the steps are before they embark on the course. And then I gave them this research question that I said, how is the COVID-19 pandemic having an impact on your teaching and learning, on your learning experience as a master's student? I didn't pick that question randomly. I do think that having the space to share those experiences, and even though it might be some complaint about I really find it really, I really struggle. I really find that there are not sufficient resources, etc., etc. I think that space for airing and sharing personal experiences is something that I can do. Even though I'm teaching research methods, I'm not doing counseling, but I think that space, and creating those tiny spaces for sharing our personal difficulties, personal issues that we are going through, in my point of view, is always a good way for if you say the boosting our confidence or developing ourselves more professionally, because it gets us to examine our own situation more closely. And also maybe by posting those, sharing those stories, you actually give a bit of support, peer support from people who are facing the same kind of situation, and sometimes offer of tips or solutions too, when people had dealt with that situation in a certain way that you had not thought of before. So, well, for the courses that I'm teaching, probably that's the little bit that I can do, at least.
Yeah, and also I think I totally agree with the term support. Yeah, even teacher, as we need support from the academy and also our colleagues, so that we can share our experience and difficulties using those technical things. You know, especially for our Chinese opera, we have different teachers from different backgrounds. So some of them are quite familiar with those technical issues, but some of them are not quite familiar with the technical things. So even students are the same. Some students come from, say, the mainland China or some different environments. They may not be able to access the web very easily. So we have to give enough support for those students that may not be able to go online. So we can have many ways of communications, not only use Zoom or using only this one single online channels, but we have to use our every ways we can share, or say WeChat or other types of communications device. So the students can feel secure that we are together and we are working together to online. So I think sharing information, communications, and also support, peer support is very important.
Brilliant. Thank you.
We can see that, Robert, that was a hard question. Someone's fishing for an answer. So I've provided a fish for you, whoever asked that hard question for all of us.
So I guess another way of making things engaging is to have lots of props and tools to sort of draw people in.
I would have thought with, you know, HKAPA, you would have tons of them. I know I saw them when I was in your back room. I mean, you got the props there, so.
I have one concluding question because we're more or less out of time, which is really, hopefully if everybody could answer in perhaps one sentence. If there's one takeaway which you would like to give to another teacher or perhaps to a student that's come out of this webinar, what would it be? Would be the one thing that you'd like to suggest somebody tried or did?
Sounds like an audience question. Go ahead, Boaz.
I think everybody has to give room to the others because we all still work in progress. So something has to be loosened and something have to give time to grow and give time to learn, even for teachers and students. Not only telling that our student how should be blah, 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 and also our own teachers have to learn, be students to learn. So we are all learners. We are all learn from online. Yeah.
Great, so that reflective practice that we all need to be developing. I think that's a really strong idea.
My takeaway would be when I first switched to online teaching and learning, I kind of thought that, that this is not working, this is hard. And then later on, when I reflect on that, and as I progressed, I found that that might be an assumption that is wrong. So my takeaway would be to stay open to possibilities. And when you really try to think hard and observe what your students are doing and think hard on how to meet their needs, you will find solutions of overcoming those difficulties that you initially thought that, that is not going to be possible.
So again, that reflection is really think about how we draw in our students, what's working, what's engaging and what's not. Curtis.
Yeah, I'd say try something out. Don't try too many things. You know, try one or two things out and see if they work. And the first time it may not work, and it only takes a small tweak. sometimes it's just a little nuance change and it works wonderfully well. If it doesn't work twice, then maybe give up on it, but don't give up on it if it hasn't worked once. So you might, just try immersive worlds, or, you might try a little role play, whatever it is. And, you take a little risk once in a while, and we're all risky. So, we're also pirates, stealing other people's ideas. So download my 100 activity free book and steal some of the ideas, merge things together too. Sometimes it's one idea that you got here and one idea here, and you take them together. So if you have a 100 idea book, it's really 1,000 ideas, because you can take one idea 77 and idea 10 and link them together somehow and create something that's yours, something that's totally unique, that's never been done before. So there's a lot of opportunity here in the online space, a lot of chance to be creative, but it's difficult, and so you have to plan it out. The hardest thing about an online class is the beginning of the course. The hardest thing about a face-to-face class is the end of the course. So online takes a lot of planning. If you plan effectively, you can have a lot of interesting things that happen along the way.
Brilliant. So the planning and the tinkering. That kind of wraps up our webinar. So thank you everybody who's been watching and listening. And I hope, I know that there have been lots of practical things to take away and try out. We'd like to say a huge thanks to Boaz, to Phoebe and to Curtis. And we'll be posting links to books and articles. I've got the book here, it doesn't show up very well, from Curtis. It's a fantastic book, and there are lots of those. So definitely go and have a little read. There's lots of ideas in those. So huge thanks to our speakers. I'd also like to say thanks to the wider Eduate team who've worked on the technical and administrative side of this. It takes quite a large amount of effort to put one of these together. And whilst this kind of concludes the formal part of our webinar, we're going to keep the chat room open for the next half an hour to an hour. So please stay around and post your questions online. I'm going to stay around, so is Louise and the speakers, just to kind of deal with some questions there.